Oh my God, I want to hug you. I'm shaking. I feel like I should be like a hope and spa, like hope and whatever they are, plugs. Just connecting.
Um, so I want to know, my first question is, with a lot of people, how did this love and passion and innate pull and drive that you've got to connect with others come from? Where did it first arrive inside of you and
In
how
the
did it
in the
guide it?
mid '60s when I was born, it is such a part of me. And first, let me just thank Letha and thank all of you. And what a remarkable 2 days. And I'm honored to be here with you. And thank you, Christie. When I was a young child in upstate New York, I was the baby of a father who was a professor for 40 years and a mother who did public relations for various PBS stations. And no joke, every morning at the breakfast table, I would vie for real estate for my bowl of cereal or my cinnamon toast because my parents would have the five local newspapers and yesterday's or the day before's or the day before of the New York Times and the Boston Globe because, of course, they came via the mail. And they both would be sitting there with their scissors or razor blade, clipping and cutting articles that made them think of people. And then very intentionally going to their respective manual typewriters and typing short little missives and then putting them into envelopes and off into the mail they went. But here's the thing, I thought everybody's parents did that. No. And in the late '80s, when I got my first job, or my first real job, which was actually across the river here at the USA, what used to be the USA Today Towers, and I had my first fax machine. And I thought to myself, I can do what my parents did simultaneously. However, I don't know about you, those of us who remember fax machines, I don't know if those faxes ever got to the destination. But anyhow, as we go further into technology, and there's many technologists in the room, in the '90s, I was able to use the tools that we had, the beginning of the internet, the aughts, the beginning of social media. So it's who I am, every last part of me.
Um, so one of the big things that you and I have talked about, and I think is the beginning stepping point of connecting with people, is curiosity.
Yes,
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you think about curiosity
sure.
and whether it is something that we can nurture? Sometimes I used to think well, you're really born curious, and
Hmm.
somewhere along the lines, maybe some of us lose it, some of us keep it. But if you could talk about how you think about curiosity and
Sure.
how we can nurture it.
Sure. Well, I live a world where we don't know what we don't know. And how boring it would be is when we turn 40 or when we turn 50 or when we turn 30 that we knew everything, right? So to me, it's the stimulation that keeps me going. And I live by this notion that we don't know what we don't know. And if we don't open that door, guess what? We're never going to learn anything more. We're never going to improve ourselves. We're never going to really connect with people. So I think it is certainly something, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised. But I also want to remind people it's the joy that comes from. Now, not everyone you meet is going to be a joyful encounter. And not every introduction you make on behalf of others may not. But there's a good chance that they may end up. And I think sometimes to me, it's that, it's that, 20% chance. And lastly, and back to my parents, they really, and it might have been because my dad was very much of a thinker, he was a Russian history professor, um, but they embedded in me at such a young age that every single person, no matter who they are, no matter what job they held, no matter where they were from on the planet, no matter the color of their skin, was deserving of our interest, our kindness, our compassion, and our curiosity. So perhaps I'm an anomaly, but I think there's many people like that have just this bug of being curious.
And if you are a shy person or consider
Yes,
yourself to be shy,
sure.
what can you do you may be curious, but then you need to take the next step?
Sure. Well, can I speak a bit about the methodology in my book?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's get into that.
years ago when I landed a book deal, I found out in a business book you have to have a methodology. So I had to look back to the 30 years of my kind of like adult life and realize that I actually was practicing some sort of a methodology. And in the book, it's known as gather, ask, do. And for the introverts or the shy people in the room, show of hands, how many feel they're introverts or shy?
Oh, wow.
Wow. Oh my God. In my next life, it's
Yeah.
going to happen. I want to be a shy and introverted person.
I'm amazed.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and the
Introverts.
two are different. We know that.
Yeah.
But the gather, ask, do, the ask component is learning to ask the meaningful questions of others so we can learn about their hopes and dreams. And everything I've researched about people who are introverted, if you can ask questions and then just sit back and then absorb, it's a much more comfortable place to be.
The listening.
The listening and but learning, there's also, yes, if you're shy or introverted, you might be a little, not comfortable asking questions, but the beauty is then you can sit back. So you need to go up that kind of ledge and then you can coast. But listening, as we know, is hard. And I had the incredible privilege and opportunity to interview Dr. Julian Treasure. Some of you may have heard of him. He's done like 6 TED Talks on listening, so highly recommended. And learned quite a bit from him. And I'll leave one of the things that I am very, very guilty because I'm a doer, and that is learning how to be less of a reactionary listener. So Christie and I were talking earlier, and every time she'd start to, I'd be like, I know what you're going to say, and I was ready to do. So I have to sit back and just listen.
Yeah, I was mentioning that quote from Alan Alda, the actor, that I really love and try to practice, which is listen with a willingness to be changed by the other person.
I love that.
And when you kind of go into it, that, which I'm used to a word that we were going to talk about, that intentionality
Yes.
of a willingness to be changed by another person. Try it out. Things change.
Yeah.
But Susan talks about intentionality, and this is one of my favorite things because we kind of think it's okay, it's intentionality, I got it, but it's different and it's got a lot of nuance, the way that you talk about intentionality, which is one of your biggest things.
Well, a lot of people, or a lot of folks, assume that two things: one, that loneliness and lack of connection came about because of the pandemic, which obviously was a very lonely and isolating time. I live alone. I don't have parents. I don't have kids. And my dog doesn't speak my language. So it was a very quiet 2 years. However, we were losing our connection with one another long before the pandemic. And even though we have all the tools that we've never had in previous times in human history to connect, right? We're technically the most connected people ever. But yet, again, people are walking around on their phones. I am by no means a Luddite. I believe in using technology, but what I feel we lost, and where the title of my book comes from, The Lost Art of Connecting, should actually be The Lost Art of Intentionality. And I'm not suggesting we all sit with newspapers in front of us. Lord knows I don't think we can ever find newspapers anymore. But it's using that intentionality that my parents so carefully and filled with kindness utilized every day that I think we've lost. And I think given the times we're living into now are even more important.
Well, there's this thing that you'd mentioned, and I do it, and I'm sure we all do it, and it's getting everything sped up, first of all. We're just sped up, and everybody's listening 2x times on their podcasts and maybe 3x, and it's speeding by. And
people listen 3x on their podcasts?
I think so. I mean, some of my younger friends definitely do. I don't, but it's just speed. And now, of course, we're always on with every type of tool that can connect us, midnight, always on. And we've all felt it in this room, how busy we are right now. And I'd argue that we're all more busy than we even were before 2020. You talk about the speed with which, so you need to kind of the intentionality, you used to mention, you just send everything.
Yeah.
You just send off that text. Just barely write it. Just
hit send on a DM, hit send on a tweet. Yeah.
So tell us more about being intentional before we.
Well, let me set the stage. How many of you receive a request on LinkedIn to connect? You graciously say yes, and then within an hour, someone is selling you something. Yeah. It's kind of yucky, right? Now, given that we have LinkedIn and Twitter and God knows what else, tools, Instagram, what if that person did 5 minutes of research or 3 minutes of research to find out a little bit more about you in a way they could be helpful to you, as opposed to try to sell you something? And that is what I fervently believe. If we walk around the world and walk around this planet and show up willing to be supportive of one another, not meaning you have to write a, $1,000 check, not meaning you have to take on their jobs. This is not about not taking the oxygen mask first, but leading with ways you can be informative, you can be a guidepost. That is where I think we need to get back to, right? And you tell the story when we first met.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, this is one of Susan's, when I think of Susan, this is what I think of. So we met on something called The List, which was a listserv for women, about 600 women. And I was introduced on the list, and not maybe 5 minutes later, did I guess it was an email at that time from Susan saying, "Hi, Christie, welcome. How can I help?"
You were working on. I mean, it was a little
I
more
was
specific.
working on it. How can I may I be of help? How can I help?
Yeah.
But that was it. Just how can what can I do to help?
Yeah, to be
And
helpful.
you start a lot of conversations like that, and
Yeah.
you mean it. One of the things that I also ask you is time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I worry about saying the words,
Yeah.
how can I
Yeah.
help? And I
Yeah.
do it
We
probably
all
too
do.
much, and then I fail
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
don't have time to follow through on the things
Yeah.
I want to follow through on.
Well, this is where vulnerability, where you also, there are many times, in 2021, I had 3 hospitalizations. I couldn't be helpful to people, but I was upfront and I said, well, I'll come back to you. And I actually, and this is going to, when you're going to think I'm neurotic, I put in my calendar in 6 months on August 31st of 2021 to get back to that person. So I'm not of the belief that this is instantaneous. This is over the arc of our life. And I was able to start a company at age 48. I'm now 58. And 90% of our business, I have 15 employees, 90% of our business has been inbound. And when that told me and taught me and really demonstrated to me was all those connections that I made in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, the people I supported, the meetings I took were not for naught. And it wasn't like I had a crystal ball and I knew. In fact, I didn't have any desire to be an entrepreneur.
Mm.
But I look back now and I think for the younger generation, even, this is so vitally important. And it's something we need to model.
For them, as opposed to being
Yes.
on devices
Yeah.
and not connecting
But
with people.
again, we can be on, I'm not anti devices, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we have amazing tools, but it's also when we can, and of course during the pandemic we couldn't, but when can we come together like this and listen to one another, right?
Mhm. Yeah, the other day, my daughter's in grade 6 and was running into the typical social situations that are coming in and learning. And it happens on these text messages that are extremely long. And I told her, you've got to pick up the phone. You've just got to do it.
Absolutely.
She did, and everything kind of changes. So we just need to kind of keep inserting some of that.
Yeah.
And um, what about, trying to think of what else we talked about so much. I guess I also wanted to talk a little bit about leadership and leaders of corporations that you work with all the time,
Yeah.
and what you can tell them about connecting, because I think there's a miss happening there as well.
Well, number one, this forcing people to come back to the office, I personally feel is very blind and is going to circle back and come back to bite them. I think what the pandemic proved is we are totally capable of not being in the same room with somebody every day and still being successful. And my company has been virtual since 2013. I learned in corporate America that people actually get along better when they don't see each other every day, right? But I understand the need to come together, but
Right.
we don't
You
need to
have
be
to.
coming together every
Right.
day. But the onus needs to be on leadership to encourage connectivity. I mean, in many of these cases, there are hybrid situations where people see each other maybe once a week, possibly once a month. And you can't just say to your employees, connect, right? Like you have to make it part of, and you need to encourage them. You also need to create safe places for people to
With trust.
connect, right? With trust and show vulnerability. I mean, the beginning of the pandemic, I was scared. You know what? I'm not going to say the word. Um, and instead of saying to my employees, everything's going to be fine, I told them. Now, granted, it's only 15 people, but if we extrapolate that, vulnerability is one of the deepest forms of connection. So I think leaders need to be open. They need to be, and that is going to establish trust, but they also need to prioritize and help people connect.
How do we connect with people in this time where there's a lot of differing opinions, and
If I knew that, I'd be winning the Nobel Prize. But
Right.
no, I mean, this goes back to a mantra, and is one, be graceful as you move through the world. Listen twice as much as we speak. We have two ears, one mouth. Be kind, right? We're going to have differences, and there's some of them are very deep, and there's a lot of lack of understanding. So try to read, and also don't be that person that just hits send when you see something on socials, because they may not be true. And we witness that. We're witnessing the travesties of what can happen when that happens. But I think, this room is a room full of brilliant, intelligent people, and we can model that behavior to others. But I don't have an absolute solution, but it's going to start with each of us. There's an organization, actually. I saw Kind Bars outside. Kind Bars, and Daniel Lubinsky, who founded it, founded an organization called Starts With Us, which is all about how do we have difficult conversations with people who differ from us. And one of the grounding principles is there's more commonality in the uncommonality than we actually believe.
What would you like to leave our audience with, our community?
Okay, two things. One, building meaningful connecting in your life actually is healthier than eating kale and running every day. Now, my running days are over, but I do eat kale almost daily. I do live in Brooklyn, after all. And two, I want everybody to give just a second of thought to this. When you think about the most amazing things that have happened to you over the last 6 months, let's say the last year, show of hands on how many of those amazing happenings happened because of a connection. Yeah, it matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.